But let's go to our first panel tonight. Then we're joined by Gemma Tognini of GT Communications, writes for The Australian as well. She joins us from the Sydney News Centre. And Caroline Di Russo, Sky News host of the Royal Report, joins us from Perth. Thanks both for joining us. I want to get your thoughts first up on my opening editorial with more expert information about the energy shambles in this country. Caroline, this shows that the government authorities, that the Climate and Energy Minister and many others point to say all the time, oh, renewables, that's the way forward. That's the quickest and cheapest way to resolve our energy problems. He's saying that the modelling is absolutely flawed, fatally flawed, and his analysis is certainly backed up by other experts. This is a real problem, isn't it?
It's a problem, but it's totally unsurprising, Chris. Like, we have never had an open and honest conversation, an agnostic conversation about our future energy and, you know, trying to decarbonise energy production in this country. We've never had that conversation. We've never had the conversation, the nose-to-tail conversation about manufacturing, about transportation, about mining, about transmission lines, about decommissioning, about waste management, about any of it. The conversation we've always had is the sun is free, and therefore, for this part of the story, you know, Act 3, Scene 2, solar and wind is the cheapest without any conversation around anything else. And eventually, you know, that there is going to come and bite this country in the backside because a whole bunch of policy decisions and a whole bunch of money has been spent on the fact that in Act 3, Scene 2, the sun is for free, and that there is fundamentally incorrect, and it is going to be a huge issue going forward because you can do all the things that you like on the back of that false assumption, but you're going to end up with an absolute donkey of an energy system at the end.
Yeah, Gemma, look, I go on about this all the time, right, because I think it's the biggest issue of national self-harm in this country, and it's only going to get worse, and we've got to keep on to it. Now, we can see through government decisions and government rhetoric, and the rhetoric from organisations like AEMO and others, we have seen for a long while that they're all in this together. They're all shaping the narrative to fit their sort of climate policies. But this work of Aidan Morrison, I mean, he's a data scientist. He drills right down into these reports and all the reports and data that feed into them. And he's exposed how they're just not accurately giving us the proper numbers and the proper pictures. There's got to be a reckoning on this.
Well, this is the thing, Chris, that I find always extraordinary in these sorts of situations. It's that whole, if you say something over and over again, it doesn't mean that it's true, and it doesn't mean that it will stack up. And the issue here is that, as you rightly point out, there's a reckoning, but not just in the distant future, it's in the fast approaching near future where, you know, the government is going to be accountable for the policy that it itself has crafted and driven. And the issue that you have here for the Energy Minister and the Prime Minister is that coming into this, as you said earlier, coming into being elected to the previous election, they made various promises to the Australian people, which have all since been broken, and not just broken around energy and the cost of energy. There is no hope of them being fulfilled. And the tragedy here is that, you know, Australia has the opportunity to learn from other parts of the world, things that have worked, things that haven't worked. How do we get the mix right? Because it is about the mix. It's not about the politics of absolutism, which is, I think, what we're seeing here. And when that reckoning hits like a freight train in the middle of the night, there's not going to be anyone else to push the blame to. I'm not sure if the Prime Minister and Mr Bowen have thought of that.
Yeah, it is exactly right. I've always said it's going to be their downfall. It's going to be the biggest mark against them when the rubber hits the road. Now, Aidan Morrison's done a lot of detailed work on this. We'll hear more from him and speak to him continually on this as he works for the Centre for Independent Studies. But if people want to Google his name and these issues, they can find a 1-hour YouTube presentation where he goes through all of this in some detail for all the anyone who wants to really drill into it. I want to go on to the government's performance overall, Caroline, and a lot of focus on news poll today. Now, I always make promises. I don't want to focus on polls so far out from elections. They don't really matter, but they give us a bit of a test of where people's sentiment is towards the government. Now, in real terms, he hasn't gone backwards since the election at all. But what happened was in the last year and a half, he soared very, very high, and he's come back to the pack in recent months, losing the voice referendum, letting a whole bunch of non-citizen criminals out into the public, being overseas a lot. How do you reckon he finishes the year up, Caroline?
Well, I think he finishes the year in what has been a masterclass of self-sabotage by this Labor government. You gave two excellent examples there where they shot themselves in the proverbial, and they were in a very good place towards the end of last year. The other polling that is interesting is the polling that was in the AFR today, where it actually looks at issues, and we see how far back the government has come in relation to managing the economy. Now that migration and refugees has become an issue, how far they've gone back in that polling, how far they don't think that, the government is dealing with cost of living issues. And when you actually look at those issues and the movement over the last 12 months, that's actually the most instructive part, because the government hasn't done the things that they said they were going to do. And as far as the economy is concerned, they've just been commentating about it, telling us about it, but they can't do anything about it, except that then Treasurer Jim Chalmers today came out and told us what a great job he'd done, which actually is just the economy kind of managing to limp across the line. We saw pretty average GDP figures a couple of weeks ago, in spite of this government and not because of it.
Yeah, Chalmers is hilarious. He has been just a spectator on the economy. He says, don't criticise me for lack of reform. And he pointed to a tax increase. Tax increases, my man, are never an economic reform. They are always a regression. But let's just have a quick look at what Albo had to say about this today.
Prime Minister, how will you regain your mojo?
What we're doing is continuing to roll out our plan for a better future, our plan that we're elected with.
You're going to shrug off the fact that your own personal approval rating has dipped?
Well, during an inflation issue that has affected the entire globe, there was obviously going to be pressure on the economy.
You got to love that, Gemma. He's suffering in the polls because of global inflation. What about the fact that he promised to get our electricity prices down, to get the cost of living down and do all sorts of other things, and he's been completely exposed on those?
I had a conversation with a client today, pretty seasoned person, been around, run a bunch of businesses, would describe themselves as a swinging voter, and that person said what we just saw in Mr Albanese, I think, is that the problem with this government is twofold. They take the electorate for a bunch of mugs. That, what kind of answer was that? That was a word salad of flim-flammy, and I'm in public relations, and that was PR spin on speed. He didn't say anything, and he thinks that everyday people like you and me who listen to that, he thinks we're too stupid to see through it. Like, it's just like the government hasn't realised it's actually in government and accountable. It's like they're still at university playing with other people's money, except for it's our money. I think, I said at the very beginning of this government, and you can check my Twitter stream if you're that bored and got nothing to do, but if this government prospers, then Australia will prosper. And if this government leads well, then this country will prosper. And what we've seen, in my view, and what we are seeing, is a government that doesn't yet know how to lead, that doesn't yet know how to have adult conversations. And in respect of Mr Chalmers, the fact that he has no real life work experience outside of academia and politics is so clear in word and in deed, and in the fact that he reckons he's a great reformer by taxing and spending. Like, you wouldn't make it up on a bad day.
You could. Now, we're nearly out of time. I do want to get your highlights and lowlights of the year. Last time I'll speak to you in 2023. But I was guessing, of course, Caro, that it has to be, as the host of the Royal Report, the coronation has to be your highlight. Maybe the lowlight was an issue you talked about last night where Harry and Meghan seemed to be out of favour with Hollywood. But that was just me guessing. What would you give us very quickly as your highlight and lowlights of the year?
Well, my highlights of the year on the royal front, obviously the coronation, because that was just a little bit too much fun. But obviously for us here in WA, a really strong result on the referendum. Very happy with that. And I think the low light has been, you know, so much of the angst post October 7 that we're seeing here in Australia. And I think that, you know, yeah, we are a melting pot country, but, you know, everyone who comes here, you really need to leave your regional prejudices at home.
Yeah, great point. Gemma, yours?
The low light, absolutely. October 7, the heartbreaking, tragic savagery of that day and the domino effect and the unveiling of Australia's problem with anti-Semitism in, as it seems, all levels of society. That is a base level I never thought I would see. A highlight, actually, Chris, one of the highlights was seeing the Kathleen Folbig verdict overturned and seeing that woman walk free after so many years behind bars. That was just an extraordinary moment.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. You just can't imagine being in her shoes. Thanks for joining us, Gemma and Caroline, not just tonight, but throughout the year. I've really enjoyed your insights, and we'll catch up over Christmas, New Year, no doubt, and look forward to talking to you next year.